So are you ready for that reading test? Yes! In this video here, we are going to actually take a reading test together. And I think it's important to kind of hear what someone else is thinking, what my process is that goes through my brain on how to answer the questions. You guys have loved the whole series that I've done on Take a Test with Me. So be sure to check out some of these other videos if you haven't already. Welcome to Purely Persistent. I'm Michelle. Now there are 3 things that I want you to remember when you're taking this test or any other reading test. First, follow the SQ3R reading technique. We're going to do this, okay? This is so important to keep you focused and engaged as a reader to help you answer the questions. Number 2, stay focused. All right, you guys, sometimes in a standardized reading test, the questions are so boring and the readings are so boring, but you are responsible for the content. So that's why we do the SQ3R technique, so you stay focused and you stay engaged in the reading. And my 3rd tip here is I want you to stay until the end of this entire video, okay? I want you to be persistent. Take this test with me. We get to poetry at the end, and so it's really important that you stick with this whole video. Let's get started. All right, so the test that we'll be taking here today is a HiSET free practice test. So the first thing that I do on every single reading is I survey. And basically this is just making it so that I'm paying attention, so that I kind of have an idea of what I'm reading. So I start with the title, maybe look at any pictures that stand out, and then I like to read maybe the first half a line of each paragraph. So let's do that. Excerpt from Do We Still Need Skyscrapers? Our distant forebears could create remarkably tall structures. The Industrial Revolution eventually provided ways to open up the interiors. These newfangled architectural contraptions found in ready market. But there were natural limits to this upward extension. Urban planning and design consideration constrain height. The consequence of these various limits is the exceptionally tall buildings. While this race has been running through the burgeoning digital revolution. Okay, so I did that really quickly, like literally you want to take like 30 seconds or less to do this, okay? And now I have a general idea of what is going on, right? So maybe the beginning of skyscrapers and sort of the difficulties that happen because of skyscrapers, and now how things are different with, digital technology. So I got that just by surveying. The next thing we want to do is take a look at the questions. The passage suggests that an important factor in making skyscrapers possible in the late 1800s was... So I'd like to take a look at the questions just so that I'm paying attention, and if something pops up, I'll be like, oh, that was one of the questions. The passage indicates that after a certain point, as the height of a building increases, the usable floor space in additional stories... Oh, I'm sure they're going to say something like that, so let's pay attention. Now, this one here refers to line 32. So I'm actually not going to take the time to read that, because when it comes time, we'll just go right back to the passage to line 32. What does the author view as the primary reason that skyscrapers are in less demand than they once were? According to the passage, why have skyscrapers become less effective advertising tools than they used to be? And finally, which of the following best summarizes the general point the author makes in the last paragraph? All right, so these are the 6 questions that align with this. So we survey, question, and now we read. So I'm going to read this. Feel free to read along with me. Excerpt from Do We Still Need Skyscrapers? Our distant forebears could create remarkably tall structures by exploiting the comprehensive strength of stone and brick. But the masonry piles they constructed in this way contain little usable interior space. At 146 meters, the Great Pyramid of Cheops is a vivid expression of the ruler's power, but inside it is mostly solid rock. The Industrial Revolution eventually provided ways to open the interiors of tall towers and put large numbers of people inside. 19th century architects found that they could achieve greatly improved ratios of open floor area to solid construction by using steel and reinforced concrete framing and thin curtain walls. And they could integrate increasingly sophisticated mechanical systems to heat, ventilate, and cool growing amounts of interior space. In the 1870s and 1880s, visionary New York and Chicago architects and engineers brought these elements together to produce the modern skyscraper. These newfangled architectural contraptions found the ready market because they satisfied industrial capitalism's growing need to bring armies of office workers together at locations where they could conveniently interact with one another, gain access to files and other materials, and be supervised by their bosses. Furthermore, tall buildings fitted perfectly into the emerging pattern of the commuter city with systems for the daily return journey. This centralization drove up property values in the urban core and created a strong economic motivation to jam as much floor area as possible into every available lot. So as the 20th century unfolded and cities such as New York and Chicago grew, downtown skyline sprouted higher while the suburbs spread wider. But there were natural limits to this upward extension of skyscrapers. The higher you go, the more floor area must be occupied by structural supports. Okay, pause. Isn't that one of the questions? Remember this one. At some point, it becomes uneconomical to add additional floors. The diminishing increment of usable floor area does not justify the increasing increment of cost. Urban planning and design consideration constrain height as well. Tall buildings have some unwelcome effects at the ground level. They cast long shadows, blot out the sky, and sometimes create dangerous and unpleasant blasts of wind as they generate pedestrian and automobile traffic that strains the capacity of surrounding streets. To control these effects, planning authorities typically impose limits on height and on the ratio of floor area to ground area. The consequence of these various limits is that exceptionally tall buildings have been expensive, rare, and conspicuous. Some organizations can effectively draw attention to themselves and express their power and prestige by finding ways to construct the loftiest skyscrapers in town, in nation, or maybe even the world. While this race has been running, though, the burgeoning digital revolution has been reducing the need to bring office workers together face-to-face in expensive downtown locations. Efficient telecommunications have diminished the importance of centrality and correspondingly increased the attractiveness of less expensive suburban sites that are more convenient to the labor force. Digital storage and computer networks have increasingly supported decentralized remote access to databases rather than the reliance on centralized paper files. And businesses are discovering that their marketing and public relations purposes may now be better served by the slick World Wide Web pages on the internet and Super Bowl advertising spots than by investments in monumental architecture on expensive urban sites. Now, note the date here. Look at this, December 1997. So we are, more than 20 years past this, and just sort of think about like how things are now, 20, almost 25 years later. Very, very different. I mean, I certainly have friends that work from home, and they don't need to go in an office building anymore, and it's our world is definitely a different place. But let's go on to the questions. Okay, so the first question. The passage suggests that an important factor in making skyscrapers possible in the late 1800s was innovation in mathematical formulas. Didn't say anything about mathematical formulas. Nothing at all. B, better understanding of the comprehensive strength of stone and brick. Now, it talked about the Great Pyramids from long ago. Now, they didn't suddenly figure out how, how stone and brick could work together. So that's definitely not the answer. C, the availability of improved construction materials and methods. Maybe. Let's look at D. The fact that large numbers of people were living in cities. Well, didn't it say that the skyscrapers and that sort of thing brought people in? So that's not the answer either. So the answer here is C. The passage indicates that after a certain point, as the height of a building increases, usable floor space in additional stories increases, decreases, needs fewer supports, is relatively inexpensive. So the answer on this is actually on the next page, but the answer is decreases, right? As the buildings go up, there's less usable floor space, right? So kind of think about like how a pyramid is like this, right? A pyramid is like this, not much usable floor space on the top, right? And so the same with skyscrapers. You can't like build it exactly like this, or else it needs to kind of be structured maybe a little bit like this, but much less usable floor space on the top. What is the meaning of burgeoning? Line 32. So we can look here. They have little numbers. So there's 35, 30. So we just count to 32, and oh look, it's right here. Okay, so read the sentence here. While this race has been running, though, the burgeoning digital revolution has been reducing the need to bring office workers together. So, is it growing? Maybe. We know that the digital revolution is growing, especially since 1997, right? Intriguing? Would it be intriguing? Has the intriguing digital revolution? Not really. Influential? Maybe. Unexpected? The unexpected digital revolution? Maybe, but probably not. So what we are doing here is we're kind of looking for context clues. Is there anything in here that is giving us any idea? Well, we know that the digital revolution is reducing, right? If things are being reduced, then that must mean the digital revolution is maybe growing. And so burgeoning means growing. So it's like burgeoning. When I think of burgeoning, I kind of think of bulging, right? It's coming out of the seams, right? So the answer is A. What does the author view as the primary reason that skyscrapers are in less demand than they once were? Workers are increasingly unwilling to commute downtown. Is that why? Are they like, I'm not commuting downtown? No. People are not impressed by skyscrapers. Is that why, I just don't care about skyscrapers? No, it doesn't really say that, right, people? It's because of their work. All right, C. Communication technologies allows employees to work from any location. It does indicate that quite a bit, doesn't it? Or D. Relatively inexpensive land is now available in the suburbs. Well, it doesn't really talk about that. So the answer is C. According to the passage, why have skyscrapers become less effective advertising tools than they used to be? Companies cannot afford to build skyscrapers anymore. No, they just maybe are not. They're maybe just choosing not to, and that has nothing to do with advertising. Skyscrapers are no longer a symbol of wealth and power. Well, what does that have to do with advertising? Right? Nothing. It is not feasible to build anything taller than existing skyscrapers. Again, nothing to do with advertising. D. Skyscrapers have less influence on people than TV and internet now do. I know that's the case for me. I'm not like, woohoo, there's a skyscraper, I guess I'll go buy a Coca-Cola, right? It's internet, right? TV. People are much more influenced by those sort of things than an ad on a skyscraper. Which of the following best summarizes the general point the author makes in the last paragraph? So this here is the last paragraph. So it talks about, while the race has been running through the burgeoning digital revolution, we have all these extra things and we don't necessarily need skyscrapers anymore. And then there's the advertising part, right? So the internet has become increasingly popular tool among businesses. That's not like the main point. I mean, we're still talking about skyscrapers here, people. Businesses should reevaluate their advertising strategies. No, it mentions that at the very end. That's a supporting detail, but that's not the main point or the general point. Many of the needs of skyscrapers once fulfilled for businesses are now being met by new technology. Definitely talked about that quite a bit, didn't it? So let's hold that one. D. Businesses are no longer willing to construct enormous buildings on expensive city lots. Again, it doesn't talk about that. So the answer is C. Okay, the last part. So we have survey, question, read, recite, review. So this is where, go back through your questions, make sure that you answered them correctly. Don't you just hate when you click C when you meant and you knew the answer was D? So now's your chance to go through, just double check your answers, but don't second guess yourself, and don't take very, very long to do this either, because it is a time test. So the next one we have here actually relates to the first one. Okay, there are two paragraphs or two articles that are right in line together. So this one is talking about pencil towers, which is a type of skyscraper. So as always, the first thing we do is we survey. So let's just read quickly the first little bit of each paragraph. Some newer buildings in New York City are remarkable, not just for their height. The tallest pencil tower soars over 90 stories high. Pencil towers certainly have their critics, however, many New Yorkers. Okay, so now let's take a look at the questions. We survey, then we take a quick look at the questions. Which building feature would most likely be included in a design of a pencil tower, but would not be included in a traditional skyscraper? The last paragraph of the passage, okay, we'll read that later. Okay, so I'm going to read it, and I know that my picture here is taking up a little bit of the room, but just bear with me, just listen, read along, okay? So, pencil towers. Some of the newer buildings in New York City are remarkable, not just for their height, but also for their width, or lack thereof, known as skinny scrapers or pencil towers. These buildings, already common in crowded city of Hong Kong, are redefining Manhattan's skyline with their thin profiles and dizzying altitudes. The tallest pencil towers soar over 90 stories high, but have a much smaller footprint than traditional skyscrapers, which stand wide at street level but narrow as they rise upward. Right? We kind of talked about that, right, with the little pyramid. Pencil towers are primarily residential and do not need to support thousands of workers pouring in and out each day. Because of this, pencil towers can be built with fewer elevator banks and more compact floor plans and a less complex system for plumbing, heating, and cooling. Okay, that was one of the questions. Shrinking these features allows architects to reduce the building's interior space requirements and simply build up, not out and around. This makes pencil towers a more attractive choice for developers when building where land is very expensive. These more slimly designed skyscrapers also cast thinner shadows and block less of the sun than their predecessors. Pencil towers certainly have their critics, however. Many New Yorkers worry about the aesthetics impact of the building's modern architecture and extensive height on the landscape of historic neighborhoods. The price of Pencil Tower's luxury residences have caused resentment as well. For example, apartments in the 96-story high-rise named 432 Park Avenue are among the most expensive in the world, selling for tens of millions of dollars. These homes are not accessible to most locals, but are marketed mostly to the global ultra-rich, who may live in New York for only a few weeks a year. Regardless, because these new skyscrapers can offer panoramic views in prime locations, the tall, slender spires will likely keep rising above the skylines of major world cities for years to come. So, survey, question, read. Now we're going to recite. We're going to answer the questions. Which building feature would most likely be included in the design of a pencil tower but would not be included in a traditional skyscraper? Okay, so what is the purpose of a pencil tower? Is it where businesses are or where people live, where residents live? Residents, right? So what would be included in a residential area and not in a business area? So keep that in mind as we answer this question here. Okay, an elevator? Well, goodness, I hope so. It's like 96 stories high, and regular skyscrapers are high too. They have elevators. A swimming pool? Maybe. A lobby? All skyscrapers have a lobby, right? Air conditioning systems? I should hope that they have air conditioning systems too. It could get pretty hot up there on the higher levels. So it would be the swimming pools. The last paragraph of the passage implies that some local residents see pencil towers as symbols of economic growth. Now, keep in mind here it says right here it says critics, right? So people that are not so happy, right? Economic growth. I mean, it's not really talking about like, oh, our city is flourishing, let's have a pencil tower. Not so much. Architectural creativity doesn't really talk about that at all, right? Someone wouldn't be criticizing pencil towers because of their architectural creativity. Financial inequality. I mentioned that quite a bit about how, it's not, these pencil towers are not really accessible to locals. They're only for the global ultra rich, right? So that's definitely financial inequality. And environmental neglect doesn't talk about that at all. So the answer is C. All right, so the next couple of questions have both the skyscraper article and also the pencil article. So we need to think about what we just read and combine our thoughts together. And this is something that's very common to see on a standardized test. Okay, so which statement best represents the main idea found in both passages? There are structural limitations that restrict how high skyscrapers can reach. So the first one talked about that, but the second one didn't really talk about that at all, right? They just talked about the amenities and that sort of thing around the skyscraper. So it's not A. B. The cost associated with constructing tall buildings consistently increases. Well, we're talking about main idea, and it doesn't. The cost is not the main idea of these, right? C. Skyscrapers are designed around the needs of their intended tenants. So the people that are living or that are using the skyscraper, that's what it's designed around. Very possible answer. And D. Newer building methods are superior to older construction techniques. So the first one talked about that, right? Skyscrapers compared to pyramids, but the second one didn't. So that's not the answer. The answer is C. Why would pencil towers likely experience less of the increased pedestrian and automobile traffic that occur around traditional skyscrapers? So pencil towers have fewer occupants, Well, they certainly do, right? Think about the thousands of people that might work in a traditional skyscraper that's like an office building or something. Whereas maybe there are only a couple hundred people that live in a pencil tower. So maybe pencil towers have less historical value. That has nothing to do with pedestrian or automobile traffic, right? The historical value. Pencil towers are located in less populated areas. No, they're located right in the middle of the downtown area. They're meant to be convenient, right? Pencil towers have more entrances and exits. Well, they're a lot smaller area on the bottom, so that would not mean that they would have more entrances and exits. So fewer occupants. If there are fewer people there will be less people walking around, and there will be less automobiles, right? So A is definitely the answer. Okay, back to our review. Survey question, read, recite, review. Review the questions, make sure that you answered them correctly. So now we're going to be moving on to a poem. Now, if you're taking the GED HiSET or TASC test, there will be poetry, okay? And give this video here a thumbs up if you would like me to make videos on poetry. I know that my students tend to struggle with poetry, and I'd be happy to make, some videos that really dig into poetry so that you master the poetry on your test. Okay, so let's start off with surveying. Okay, now when I survey poetry, I look at the stanzas, which are like the little paragraphs that they have separated, but this one only has like two. It has like a really big one and a shorter one. So I might, read every few lines. So, who burns for the perfection of paper? So at 16, I worked after high school hours. Yellow paper, stacked 7 feet high. No gloves, fingertips required. Sluggish by 9 p.m., the hands. 10 years later in law school, every pair of hands upturned and burning. Okay, so that's a little bit of a survey. We kind of have an idea of what's going on. But let's look at the questions that deal with this. So this one here, first one deals with, it says lines 1 through 21. Okay, so we don't really need to take the 5 seconds or 2 seconds it would take to read that. Sorry, the work the poem describes apparently requires. Which of the following is not among the themes the poem addresses? This one refers to lines and the last 3 lines. Okay, so a couple of them we're going to pay close attention to. The other ones we'll just go back to it. When the question comes, we'll look back at those lines. Okay, so let's read it. Who burns for the perfection of paper? At 16, I worked after high school hours at a printing plant that manufactured legal pads. Yellow paper, stacked 7 feet high and leaning as I slipped cardboard between the pages, then brushed red glue up and down the stack. One thing that's important, so kind of do some imagining. So imagine the guy who's painting the paper up, or the red glue up and down the stacks, right? No gloves, fingertips required for the perfection of paper, smoothing the exact rectangle. Sluggish by 9 p.m., the hands would slide along, suddenly sharpen paper, and gather slits thinner than the crevices of skins hidden. So he's talking about paper cuts, right? Full of paper cuts, his hands. Then the glue would sting, hands oozing, till both palms burned at the punch clock. The punch clock. 10 years later, in law school, I knew that every legal pad was glued with the sting of hidden cuts. That every open law book was a pair of hands upturned and burning. The first question. In lines 1 through 21, so that would be 1 through 21, that's the first stanza, the first part. The speaker in the poem is primarily describing his current job? No, it's not his current job, because here it's saying 10 years later, this is what he's doing, right? So it's not his current job. The job he had as a teenager, quite possibly, because look, it says, at 16, I worked after high school hours, right? That's a teenager. The challenges he faced in high school? No, it's just talking about his job, right? So not C. D, the process of bookbinding. We're not talking about books, we're just talking about those legal pads, right? So the answer is definitely B. The work the poem describes apparently requires speed. Didn't really talk too much about, like, you have to hurry through it really fast, right? It's not necessarily speed. Precision, definitely some precision, right? Like, he's slipping the cardboard between pages. Think about, like, each page is like, all right, there are 90 pages on this yellow pad. So he's probably like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, counting all the way till 90, then slipping in that piece of cardboard. So maybe. Accurate timing, doesn't talk about timing. Technical training. So technical training would be like, okay, maybe he becoming like an automobile mechanic or something like that. There's no technical training. This was his high school job. He, slapped on the glue, slipped in the cardboard. That's what he did. So there's no technical training that was required. So definitely precision for this job. Which of the following is not, among the themes of the themes the poem addresses? The little known ordeals involved in the creation of ordinary objects. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've never worked in a paper factory. So I don't know that this is all of the little details, right? So that is, that's part of this. The acknowledgement of the dignity of all kinds of work, right? At the end, he's like, he really appreciates those textbooks and those legal pads, right? Because he knows what it went through. So he acknowledges these people that are working so hard. C, the contrast between the speaker's relationship to legal pads as a factory worker and a law student. It mentions that. Or D, the toll that after-school jobs take on the academic achievement of high school students. It doesn't talk about that at all, right? It's just talking about the job in the paper factory. So it says which is not, and D is not. Which of these does the speaker most strongly express at the end of the poem? So this would be like the last stanza. So we can quickly read through it. So 10 years later in law school, I knew that every legal pad was glued with a sting of hidden cuts, that every open law book was a pair of hands upturned and burning. Okay. So, the recognition of what workers have had to undergo to produce the articles he uses in his profession. He does really talk about that, doesn't he? B, regrets that he has chosen a career that entails the use of legal pads. It doesn't talk about regret, right? C, resentment. There's no resentment. Resentment about the working conditions he once had to bear. It doesn't talk about that. C, relief. That he can now take legal pads for granted rather than suffering through the process of making them. He's not taking them for granted. He's appreciating them, right? That was kind of one of the questions we had before, one of the answers. He appreciates it. He recognizes all the hard work that those people are putting in. Thank you, legal pad and bookmakers everywhere. In the last 3 lines, okay, so we've got right here, these last 3 lines. The comparison of an open law book to a pair of hands upturned and burning can be seen as suggesting all of the following ideas except. So we have a passion for justice, right? He definitely, it's a law book. He has a passion for justice, things being right and true. So that's not the answer. Note how it says except. The hope that a system of laws can offer, yes, he is doing his best and he appreciates these people, right? A gesture of resignation or giving up? No, you guys, this is like positive. Or D, the physical hardship endured by production workers. Yeah, so the answer is C. He doesn't have a gesture of recognition or giving up. And finally, just review those again. You know what? You rock. You stayed until the end of the video, and that really just shows your determination and your persistence in getting this done. You should be so proud of yourself. So comment down below and tell me that you stayed until the end. Now, of course, it's always important for me to tell you that you are so important and you're going to do amazing things in this world, especially because you are so persistent in getting things done. You know, when things get hard, you stick with it. And I know that because you're here at the end of this video. So thank you so much. You are a beautiful and amazing person. I believe in you. Make sure that you believe in yourself. And of course, be purely persistent. Peace, guys.